Hey there, I'm Ryan from Deeper Than the Backlog. We're here today. We're going to talk about part two of our Introduction to Kanban series. And part two is all about WIP limits, WIP, so work in progress. But before then, we're going to go step back a little bit and talk about a recap of part one. If you missed that, it's out on our YouTube site. So go check that out, Deeper Than the Backlog. And then you can also check it out at our website, deeperthanthebacklog.com. We have all our podcasts and videos all organized in a central location. So let's talk a little bit about our recap of part one. We talked about how to set up a Kanban board, and what you can see here is we have columns and we have rows. And if we remember from part one, the columns are your stages of where your tasks or work are currently at. So it's the status. And then the rows or swim lanes are different people where you can assign work to. You could have different teams. There's a lot of many ways to dice it. Right now, what you're looking at is swim lane one is me, Ryan, and swim lane two is Christine. So we have a Kanban board where we could put tasks that would cover either tasks I'm responsible for or Christine. So if you look at this, you can think of a team. Maybe you have a team of 5 to 7 people. You could have a Kanban board with the team members' names along the left side. And those would be your rows and swim lanes, and then each person would have designated tasks that they're pulling from a to-do column or a personal backlog. Now the tasks you can see are in yellow sticky notes, and this is a digitized version of a Kanban board. You can also do a physical version, like on a whiteboard or a chalkboard, or use sticky notes, like you can see behind me if you're watching the video. I have a physical Kanban board behind me that I use to organize my daily and weekly activities. But back to this digitized one, this is just a mock-up tool, but there's many tools out there. We talked about Trello, and then any of the Agile software packages usually have some type of Kanban plugin or Kanban feature you can use as well. But back to this digitized version, our columns are to do, which is essentially our backlog. We have in progress, which is the work we're actively working on. Waiting is a column we added, not absolutely required for your initial Kanban board. But what waiting allows you to do is if you get stuck on something or have a dependency on someone else or someone outside, something outside of your control, you can put it into the waiting, and it reminds you have to jump back and find out a status of something or get something from somebody before you can progress on that activity. In this case, I have a doctor's appointment at 3 o'clock. There's not much I can do until about 2:30. So I just wanted to put that in the waiting, that's important. It was the next one on my priority list, and it needs to happen. So we're going to put it in waiting. And then at 2:30, when I head out there, I'll just move it into progress. And then when I'm back home, we move it to done. And then in progress there, we have cutting the lawn right now, which obviously I'm not, but this is just a theoretical demonstration here. If I were actively doing this, I'd be outside cutting the lawn. And then I do have one in the done column. I've already sent out meeting minutes to, or meeting agenda, sorry, to the board. So you can see everything progresses left to right. And that's the whole point of a Kanban board, is you're moving through statuses or stati going left to right into your done column. And that's where we left off from our last part one discussion of introduction to Kanban. Part two, this will be a real short introduction into WIP limits. It's not a deep topic, pretty straightforward. And what WIP limits are, or work in progress, is where you assign to each column or some of the columns a limit for what type of activities or work items can be in there. And so we'll put an example here. Let's go over to our work in progress. And what you would typically do is just define a number. So let's put 2, for example, and we'll just put 2 there. And what that will remind us, either us if it's a personal Kanban, or a team or a business, depending on how you're using your Kanban board, is that you can only have 2 sticky notes, 2 tasks, 2 items in that column of in progress. You can apply this to any of your columns or just a subset. Really, the most critical columns out of these 4 would be your in progress and your waiting. You don't want to overload your waiting, because then that creates a lot of waste in your system and unnecessary downtime for activities to complete. And then your in progress, you don't want to overload where a person or multiple people have too much on their plate and they can't focus on whatever the top priority is. So in this case, we're just putting 2 that reminds us we cannot go over that maximum of 2 items in our in progress column. Now, if you're using digitized versions of a Kanban or software, a lot of times this will manage it for you. You can go into a setting, define your WIP limit on the column or stage or status column, and then it will limit you. So if you tried to drag, for example, a task into that column and say, oh, I want to add another one into in progress, it would not let you. It would move it back and give you some type of alert. In this case, this is just a mock-up, so I could, go over that 2, but that 2 there is to remind me not to put more than 2 in the in progress column. You can also do this on your physical whiteboards as well, or chalkboards. Maybe you make it a different color so it kind of sticks out and reminds you or the team not to go over that. So a couple things. Why do you want to use work in progress or WIP limits? So Kanban is really a pull system. It's where you define work, you prioritize work, and then you pull work. So you're pulling work to yourself, or you're pulling work to a team or a business group. And what defining WIP limits does in this case is it really encourages or molds the thought process around completing something before starting your next task or work item. And if you go back and look at some of our, or listen to our podcast on, serialized or, back to back work versus parallel work, where you're trying to multitask, you'll very clearly see that multitasking or working on multiple items at once slows you down. So the intent of Kanban is to be very efficient. And if you put a WIP limit in place for your stages of work, you're increasing your efficiency. And what that really does is it changes your mindset to say, okay, I can't really bring in more work until I finish what I'm actually working on, and that produces value. I can move it to the next stage. So that would be one reason why you do it. The other reason is it creates a capacity metric that you can then measure, right? How do you improve? You need to be able to measure something in order to know you're improving and figure out how to improve. So it creates capacity limits for yourself or your team, and that way you can focus on efficiency improvement, prediction improvement of task completions. And all that leads into something called cycle time and lead time. We'll go into more detail in future parts of the introduction to Kanban. But at a very high level, cycle time is just the time between when a task started. So essentially, moving a task from to do to in progress when that action happens. That's the start. And then how long did it take to move to the done or completed column? That would be your cycle time. Lead time, a lot of times, is more important when you're working with business groups or you're getting requirements from outside customers. The lead time defines when the request was made. So when that customer or business group provided that request, wrote maybe a user story or just provided a written request, and then when was it completed. So that would measure usually typically a little longer because you're not starting the task the second it's requested. But what it does is it gives your business or customer a better idea of how long it takes to get a feature or a request from another group or person working on those items. So those are some of the reasons you'd want to use work in progress. Not absolutely required for Kanban. You can do Kanban without defining WIP limits. However, I would encourage you to define them because at the end of the day, it's going to make you more efficient, whether you're doing this for you personally or a team or organization. If you're doing business, organization, team, I would highly suggest it. I think it's absolutely a must if you're going to improve, if your focus is on getting better or improving. If you're doing it for yourself, maybe not so much value, but it will help you. It will help you to be able to remind you to focus on tasks versus taking in, 3, 4 different things and trying to multitask and then getting hit with efficiency penalties. So not absolutely required, highly recommended. To do Kanban by the book, you would definitely want to add these in to one or all of your columns. Now, that being said, you can also add them into your to-do, waiting, and done. Typically, done doesn't make a lot of sense because that's just your completed work. Waiting and in progress, probably the most beneficial columns to add it to. To-do, I don't find that super beneficial. I wouldn't personally add it to the to-do, but some business groups do add a limit to the to-do so that they limit what requirements are seen in the backlog. So the next question might be where to start. How do you pick this number 2? I just put 2 in progress. So there's a couple different ways you can start. The first way would be just don't put anything in there. Run your Kanban for a little bit and then analyze work going through. I don't necessarily recommend that way unless you're doing this with teams, and then you might be able to dive into some data and define what your WIP limits would be based on your team cycle times and throughputs. I would prefer the second method. So if you're starting out, it's just simpler and then you can adjust later on. You want to start with either a 1 or 1.5 times the number of people you're running the Kanban for. So in this example, we're running it for 2 people, Ryan, Christine. There's 2 people, so you could either put your Kanban limit at 2. That would be 1 per person. So 1 times 2 is 2. Or you could up it a little bit and make it 3 because we have 2 times the 1.5, which would give us 3. So that would be a guidance of a starting point. I would do the more conservative and start at the lower end. So the 1 times the number of people in the team. And that would be how many items you would put in your in progress column. And then you can analyze from there. And if you can handle 2 things at once where you're focusing on cutting the lawn. So maybe, for example, you put cutting the lawn here and then you put practice guitar. Obviously, you can't do these at the same time. But what you do know is that cutting the lawn is on the left. So that's higher priority. You're going to focus on cutting the lawn. Then you're going to practice your guitar next. So that would be a case where there's 2. If we move the practice guitar back, maybe Christine has a task, you could put her task into in progress, and then you would still have 2 on your board. But the idea is that is the maximum amount of tasks or work items you would want to have on the board, especially in the in progress column at this time. So let's recap a little bit. So 2 main reasons why this would be super beneficial. 1, it helps focus. If we focus, we're more efficient. We don't have that multitask penalty. And if we don't have that multitask penalty, we get work done faster, quicker, more efficiently. And then once complete, we can move on to the next highest priority item. The second part is really around communicating to stakeholders, customers, business groups, or whoever's visualizing or monitoring your Kanban board or just looking at it for a status update. So when you look at it, it's very clear that there is limitations on capacity. So as human behavior, we want everything and we want it now. So if we have a list of 10 items, we want all 10 items and we want them as soon as possible. This reminds us that in this case, we have two people and there can only be two items in progress at any time. And priority becomes absolutely critical because that's the order I would be receiving or you would be receiving your features, requests, tasks, or items completed. So that adds huge value from an efficiency and prioritization standpoint because your stakeholders are informed of what you're working on and what the limits are. And that way you have a realistic expectation. So that's it. That's work in progress. Very easy to do. We can add maybe in our waiting column, maybe our max is that we only want to have one maximum in our waiting column. What that tells us is if we're ever in a situation where we want to move something else into that waiting column, we can't. So we should really try to finish or move that item in the waiting back to in progress and then over to done before we move the next item over to waiting. All right, so that was part 2 on work in progress, introduction to Kanban. We will be posting this in our podcast for this week, which gets released on Thursday. The visual will also be up on YouTube, so you can watch and see the sharing of the actual Kanban board and how I'm explaining WIP limits. Not absolutely necessary. However, sometimes visuals are a little easy to follow. So you could jump over to our YouTube channel, Deeper Than the Backlog, and check out this video or just listen to it on the podcast. They'll both be released simultaneously, also up on our website, deeperthanthebacklog.com. And look forward to part 3 coming up. So part 3 will be on managing flow and some of the metrics we talked about, cycle time, the lead time, how those are valuable, and then how do we reduce or eliminate bottlenecks in our work. And that's what managing flow will be about. So another little short snippet in video about managing flow. Look for that in the next week or so. We'll get that posted up. If you have feedback for us, you like what you're seeing, you don't like what you're seeing, please let us know. Feedback at deeperthanthebacklog.com. Send us email. Check out our website for more information. We're on Instagram now and then posting, and then YouTube, you can find our videos. In any of the podcast outlets, you can go out to Spotify, you can go out to Apple Podcasts and listen to our podcasts. And let us know your thoughts and feedback. Give us some ratings so that we can know how to improve going forward. All right, we'll see you next Thursday. Bye.